Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the engineering side of data. Hey, we got a great one here today. This is part 2 of a prior episode. We're going to be talking about Datavault. We covered a lot of good ground the last time we talked about it, and we're going to pick up where we left off and talk about some great content. I have as my co-host, once again, Michael Meyer, and also we have our returning guest, Cindi Meyersohn. Thank you both for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me back.
Excellent. Well, we're going to dive right into the questions. Like I said, we're going to pick up where we left off. Cindi, Datavault had a recent announcement that's pretty significant. Would you care to elaborate on that?
Sure, I can start to give you guys a peek of what's going on. So we announced something called the Advanced Virtual Datavault Extension. It does not replace Datavault 2. It basically enhances what has already been, designed, built. So if you've already implemented a Datavault, we're going to take advantage of what's been built, the knowledge you have in the foundational principles of Datavault, and we're going to extend those. The real focus of the Advanced Virtual Datavault is really this idea of enabling teams that are currently, say, going at a pace of, X to now go at a pace of X times 10. We're basically compressing the life cycle of the team dramatically, and it basically simplifies the process engine underneath.
Oh, sounds exciting.
It is. Works.
I bet. Yeah. Everybody likes faster, right?
Datavault. I can't wait to hear more about it in the future. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So one of the things has been kind of as stepping into a Datavault is why is Datavault considered a methodology and not a framework?
Well, it's really basically by definition. A framework will only tell you what needs to be built. It doesn't tell you exactly how to build it. And in a Datavault 2 solution, we provide these exacting patterns for modeling and process designs. And those patterns cover people, your teams, your ways of working, as Scott Ambler would say, your wow. Processes, load, orchestration, engineering process patterns, and technology. Those are the absolute standards. And when they're adhered to, they bring success. So it's a methodology, which is exacting versus a framework that permits you to apply different methods and other things. Zachman's a framework, for example. CMMI is a framework. They tell you what needs to be done and what pieces are or componentry is important. They don't tell you how to build that. So that's why we say that Datavault 2 is a methodology. And when you follow those standards, you can produce what we call a Datavault done right, everywhere, every time.
That's excellent. That's a really good, insightful answer to that, because I know that comes up even with the people around our organization. So that's very helpful. So what in your experience causes the disconnect between business, data science, and IT?
That's a great question, Mike. In my experience, I believe part of it has to do with speaking the language of the business. Bill Inman wrote a great little book called Hearing the Voice of the Customer, which I read a few years back. It's just a quick read, but it's great. Bill has such great insight, and he's been in the industry for so long. So as always, I look at his work as, words of wisdom. But oftentimes, business and data science, they're both IT customers. So when I talk about the business, I kind of put them both in the same bucket, if you will. In my experience, IT and business have competing goals, and objectives. Generally the business data goals and objectives, they're focused on the business's ability to trust the data, which ties to auditability and accountability, data governance. They want to be able to self-explore and discover and self-serve analytics, from a set of reliable data. And they're trying to sift through volumes of data that's moving, all around the organization, all around the world, this idea of volume in motion. And they need to be able to tap into that data effectively. Data science really wants data in its raw form, which is where they differ from the business. The business wants information, data that's been correlated, interpreted, coalesced, aligned, all of that stuff. Data science wants raw data. And for machine learning, they need high quality, cleansed, curated raw data. So once again, their demand on IT falls into the areas of data governance, data quality, data management, cataloging, organization, right? They also need this idea of structural definition and understanding of the data. So IT's goals usually align with the requirements to deliver information to the business amidst, I would say, the challenges of data acquisition. IT is dealing with big data issues. And when we talk about big data, we aren't just talking about, larger and larger volumes of data. We're talking about volumes of data in motion, data that's flowing into the organization through the processing cycles and analytic tools, out to the consumers through any means, web services, APIs, star schema instantiation, flat wide structures, whatever the business needs. And IT's concerns lie in what we would in engineering called the illities of data engineering and management, whether they're dealing with big data or not. Issues like reliability, availability, maintainability, auditability. We think about things of, in terms of security and privacy, ownership and government, master data management, quality assurance, and so on. So in a nutshell, the goals and objectives of IT can be diametrically opposed to those of the business. And I think that's one of the biggest disconnects. As an industry, as data warehousing professionals, one of the things we need to learn to do better, and some organizations do this better than others, but is to be able to speak to the business and the data scientists in their terms, putting on that business cap. So that's where I think some of the disconnects come from.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting because I'm just starting to see this more and more of this also, and I'm starting to see from the groups that in our organization, at least, that do a lot of the machine learning is, effectively building data sets, like you said, whether it's from raw or whatever level of data they're looking at, but is be able to do it efficiently. And so one of the things we're looking at as our engineering teams is how can we be helpful to, help that process speed up without getting, you don't need to be in all the business of the data science that they're doing, but just being helpful for them so they can curate it quicker and start running more tests. Because I think one of the things that's got to be very disheartening sometimes is if it takes you months to go out and actually curate a data set, and then finally get to start working with it. So that's been a personal goal anyway, is to try to help drive that. And we do have, what's interesting in our organization too, we have our business is very tied into our teams that are doing machine learning. And I guess maybe it's just the nature of the business, but that also has been helping a little bit too, to kind of see the needs in a holistic manner across both groups. So very interesting though. It's a very interesting dynamic. And I met in many organizations, especially when you get larger organizations. And like you said, which is that sheer volume of information flowing back and forth.
Yeah, I think also the other thing is, data science is this new sexy, sort of endeavor that capability, if you will. And I think the business is fascinated by it, right? And so you do find, I think, business more prone to be more interested in what data science is doing than what's going on in their IT departments, right? Because it's this new kind of concept, if you will, or capability. So,
oh, absolutely, yeah, they're looking to get to that magic answer, right? And they've heard that data science can give it to them.
Yeah, it's a little scary sometimes to think about. To be honest,
that's very true. That's very true. But that's Mike. That's good to hear about your organization making those steps. I think that there's a lot of data scientists that are still operating as curators of their own information, right? They're still digging. They're still spending the majority of their time finding their own data, coming up with their own observations, formats, stuff like that. And now, hopefully, it can start coming sourced from a IT supported data product of sorts. So that's good to hear.
Yeah, if I could, Mike, I'm curious. How is the collaboration in your organization between, the IT department and your data scientist, if I may ask that question?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things that's really is starting to change is the fact that as we start to build out Datavault and also experience moving to the cloud for our enterprise data warehouse, is that we're having really good conversations, because as things have evolved over 10 years, things have evolved and people are like, well, things have changed. So is what we were doing before still the right thing to be doing? And looking at it, and I tell you, I've never seen so many people get involved and just so energized about building out this next thing and actually getting the value out of it. Because, as some things, when you ever build version 1, a lot of times it's version 1 and it gets you what you need, but a lot of times then you don't have as many cycles to go back and keep improving on it. You move on to the next area too fast or whatever, and you have, employee turnover. So this is the time that we started saying we need to catalog this. We need to actually say what we truly need, right? So building out in terms of business intelligence, building out bus matrices to be able to say, what is the information that we really need across, what dimensions and stuff. So this is, to me, is going to be huge in the value in that. And so the other thing that we're really trying to work to is to start to say, and we need to spend more time with our as we're curating more data now with our data scientists to say this is available and how can we assist you. So.
Yeah, and one more question, and I'll stop asking you. I'm not trying to put you on the hot seat, but I'm curious also because obviously I've worked with data scientists too, and have you run into, or let me ask it this way: have you found that over time, as you're implementing your data vault, your data scientists are more or less apt to have duplicate data acquisition going on, in parallel with the efforts that your team has already made? Is that a fair question?
That's a fair question, because a lot of the data sets are curated outside and like you said, and we don't know about those today. So one of the things, getting that a little bit more kind of integrated with our business and with the data scientists at the same time, is let's start to build those libraries of data sets out. And if they are very specific to just your one time doing that, that's fine. But if these are reusable, let's make sure that people know where they're at and can reuse them. So that's kind of the critical state I think that we're in. And that's some of the planning that we're trying to do this year to really.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay.
Cindi, talking about an automation tool, how important is it to have an automation tool when you use Datavault?
Well, I think first of all, we ought to just talk briefly about why so many vendors are able to write DVT components into their automation tooling. And it goes back to the methodology, this consistent, repeatable, pattern-based methodology, not just in the model, but in the process designs, the data pipeline engineering and the way, we run the agile teaming. If we look at agility, the capability maturity model is the grandfather of all things agile. And so in order to automate, right, there are certain pieces that must be in place. And we talk about the CMMI levels of maturity with regard to software development. We look at Datavault, the Datavault solution, any BI full end-to-end solution as a software development effort. And we come from this position that, as far as definition, which is level 2 of the CMMI pyramid, if you will, you can't define what you don't understand. And then we have this level 3 identification, which is, you can't identify what you don't define. And we step up in the maturity curve, if you will, and we get to level 4, and it has to do with measurement. And you cannot measure what you don't identify. So each piece steps, upon the next. And then finally, when it comes to optimization, you can't optimize what you don't measure. So every step of the capability maturity model leads you up to, ultimately should lead you, I will say, to optimization, which is really what Agile is all about. The kicker here is that you cannot automate what you haven't optimized. So automation, in my opinion, puts you off the charts for CMMI. So when we talk about automation and automation tools, the reason that vendors can take the patterns is because Datavault is already at level 5 out of the box if you follow the standards. So one of Datavault Alliance's focus is, as a standards board, is to provide vendor tool component certification. We introduced what we call our VTCP, which is our vendor tool certification program, at last year's conference to help our customers identify automation tools that have passed DVA's testing rigor for compliance. And because we have a set of standards and patterns, right? Datavault being born out of CMM, vendors are able to take advantage of the metadata-driven approach that's inherent in Datavault. And the result usually is this suite of vendor tool components that help teams accelerate. You don't need a tool, but we recommend tooling because rolling your own requires maintenance and extensive testing. So the team, in our opinion, should be focused on rapid delivery of business value, not tool maintenance and development, which is why we recommend finding a tool that incorporates Datavault 2 compliant methodology.
So find a tool, just know when to use it.
Well, think about a tool. A tool is only as good as the hand of the skilled craftsman who holds it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there right now.
And one of the things I think that's important with the automation is when you're first starting and trying to get your environment set and get some of the things that you're trying to get done, you're bound to make some early mistakes, right? Mm-hmm. You're still learning, so you're going to iterate a couple times over something. With having that automation there, it's like, well, now I can just regen what I need to do and get going and testing the data. And to me, that's the biggest difference. If you were, let's just say you're 10 years into this and you know it inside and out, probably, you can do some things, but still it's the value of being able to generate this stuff. And like you said, Cindi, I think it's the agility play of being able to get in your hands of your users to start validating and giving you feedback of what they're seeing is really the important part.
You're absolutely right, Mike. 100%. I concur with everything you just said. It is the ability to iterate, and those tools that's why we call them really automation team acceleration tools, right? So that you can, make changes very, very quickly with low impact as you're moving along, discovering, things like your business keys and your relationships that may not be self-evident in the data, and being able to iterate and integrate on business keys. So I absolutely concur that is exactly how you ought to use those automation tools.
Cindi, why aren't more people using Datavault?
I actually hear that one. That's a common question, and you'd be surprised at how many companies and educational institutes and public institutions are using Datavault. We do have clients across every sector of industry, and it's growing daily. So it's like coming out of the woodwork. As I've taught over the years, I'm finding out more and more clients whose names I recognize, Fortune, 100, Fortune 500 companies that are using Datavault. They just don't, loud it out there, right? So we have, for example, in the educational arena, we have several universities around the world that use Datavault's in their organizations to run the analytics for, their administration and operations areas. New York University, for example, I believe the University of New South Wales. And personally, I've been training a group of users that are part of an institute up in Canada. We're always surprised to hear from clients who have started a Datavault or, wanted to sort of kick the tires on their own. And then they come to training, to learn more, to get certified. And this is where we find out who's innovating and who's experimenting or implementing our solutions sometimes. Most people, come to find Datavault, and we talked about this during our first podcast, because they're searching for a better way. And that's, again, how I found it. I'm teaching 2 classes concurrently right now. And in both of those classes, I asked my students this past week, why did you come to class? What brought you to Datavault? And most of the students said they were looking for a better way. They had been building, in the traditional star schema or third normal form, and they were running into problems with scalability and flexibility, sort of absorbing changes. And their current solutions were experiencing performance issues. And they were struggling to get data through the pipelines and out to the consumers. And I hear this all the time.
Yeah, that absorbing changes has got to be the biggest one, right? Yep.
It is. So if I can continue with that thought, let me just throw something out there. I think we talked last time, we were sort of all chuckling about like the new terms and things that come out in the industry. And, we look at things like digital transformation and data modernization efforts, where a lot of businesses obviously are looking for ways to solve their data analytic problems. And, they're looking to hardware and tooling solutions. And those only address the problems for so long, before they hit the wall again. It's one of the reasons I believe that, some of these efforts are failing. So, Datavault, as we've been saying, is a methodology. So many of these businesses, this approach to digital transformation and modernization efforts, they approach that with the same mindset where they're looking at technology to sort of fix their problem, the old silver bullet. And if you're going up against, I'll just joke around for a minute, guys. If you're going up against a werewolf, a silver bullet is beneficial. But a werewolf isn't reality, right? The data challenges are very real, and they can't be solved by tech, by this silver bullet. They have to be addressed by a plan, a consistent approach, a methodology that is engineered, to build architected, resilient, trustworthy solutions. So I was talking with a dear friend and a colleague, a brilliant guy who we were talking about this whole issue of digital transformation and modernization efforts, and why people were running into problems and businesses were running into problems with these huge investments that they're making. And he made an observation. He said, Cindi, I think the problem is that they're adopting hardware, software solutions, which has happened in our industry for decades, but they're not changing their mindset. They're not trying to embrace a methodology that goes on top of all of those pieces. And I have to concur with him. I thought that was a quite an insightful observation. So anyway, I just think that as more and more engineers and IT professionals search for solutions, they're coming across Datavault too. They're reaching out, they're asking questions, they're getting involved in various users group, like we started DVNOG, which is the Datavault of North America users group. There's a extremely active user group in UK called Datavault UK. And they want to find out more about Datavault. It's growing in awareness, and there's this, that there is this, I would say, stable, tested third approach known as Datavault 2 that's been around publicly, for over publicly for over 22 years. So it's becoming more well known. And the more people who hear about it, the more people, that get excited about it. The other reason why I think Datavault appears to be less known in our industry has to do with the fact that traditionally our institutes of higher learning are slower to pivot at the speed of technology. For example, in the area of information engineering and data science, I would venture to say that the majority of those programs focus on star schemas and third normal form modeling structures. So it's like the way Microsoft took over the PC industry with its software. They started introducing their products into the higher learning educational institutes with free or greatly reduced license offerings to students and teachers. So they caught this emerging workforce first, and then they started educating, younger generations on the tools, all the way down now to primary school, right? So you tend to use what is most familiar. And if star schemas are what are familiar, then that's what you're going to use.
Yeah. And to me, what's been really interesting is, as somebody that's just, again, very, very early in the journey, is when we get into some of the aspects of modeling, what we always challenge each other to go back to and say, how does this align to our business process? So if you start getting off into, left field, it's like, hey, it's time to pull back. This is all about the business processes and how we align to the metrics that they need to do, not about how many different relationships inside the data you can build out. That's not the purpose. Yeah. And so that's been very helpful. And when we have those discussions and bring the group back together, and the business really understands, this is the first time I can say that I see just business folks' eyes light up because they understand what the vault is about, because it aligns more to their processes.
That's awesome. I'm excited for you, Mike, for what's going on inside your organization. I really am. Because Datavault, I say this all the time, so you guys are going to hear this again. It is and always has been and always will be about the business. We encourage in our training, in the way we take our approach, the whole concept is based on approaching a data warehouse from the business concept and the business process perspective, from the eyes of the business, so that we only build what brings the business value. We don't, and in class this week, I was kind of teasing my students, because you have this temptation, as we were sort of going through the workshop exercise, they were thinking, oh, well, if we pull this in, we can answer this question. We do this, look what we can show the business. And then you have this one small voice, in the class that's like, that's not the question that we chose to solve. So it was kind of fun. It was like a reset, and we were all sort of chuckling about it, because that's what we do. I think as data engineers, we see this huge possibility, right, of, oh, we can answer this, and oh, we can answer that. And you have to come back to, what did the business ask for? That sort of internal scope creep that we get because we get excited about the data and what the potential is, the sort of the art of the possible. That's what gets us in trouble with delivery. And so, I commend you with what your organization is doing and the way your business is involved, and sort of that reeling the team back into reality of what are we supposed to be delivering that brings the business value that they're asking for. So
yeah, it's quite energizing to be able to do that, and just to get the confirmation like that. So one of the things is, again, and I'm sure you've seen great your experience with seeing this, but it's, how does Datavault 2 enable data science? Some of the examples you've seen and how this all can work.
Well, I've seen it. Obviously, I've seen it in inside the intelligence community. But let me give you an example. Let me just tell you guys a little story, and this is true. This is a true story, which are always the best anyway, I think. But when Dan brought Datavault out of Lockheed back in 2000, 2001, he was working as a consultant. He was hired by a business that at that time was one of the first online insurance brokerages in the US. And that was business. It was also one of the first companies that actually built a Datavault as their foundational online transaction processing system. That Datavault actually undergirded their whole online, if you will, website process. So Dan introduced this concept of using a state transition diagram to help the business understand what was happening to the visitors that came to the site. You know, getting this insight into the patterns of behavior, those are data science type insights that you derive. But they wanted to look at the patterns of behavior on the website so they could mitigate this occurrence that, you know, we've all come to know in if you do business on the web as an abandoned cart, right? And so they added this mining engine into the equation. So the way it worked was that, you know, as a web surfer visited their website, the company would capture their session ID and their cookie into two hubs. And this is before people started turning cookies off, right? But their system would pop an ad to incentivize the web surfer to sort of their visitor to sort of move along the path toward a sale, right? From one state to the next, if you will. And then the next incentive would be something like a promotional offer to get the surfer's email address, which is another business key from our perspective, which got stored in a third hub. And then if they were able to get that email address, then the surfer's state was changed from just a web surfer or a visitor, you know, to a prospect, because now the company had a way to reach back out to them. Then they'd pop another ad or promotion. They'd incentivize the prospect to sort of enter their home address, because if they could get their home address, they could provide a quote or an estimate for insurance. So all of this sort of makes sense. You know, once you have a residential address, right, that gives the business the ability to actually give you an accurate quote or an estimate, right? And so that also created what they would call a qualified lead. Now, the thing was, the way the business made their money was by selling a policy, right, as a brokerage. So there was always this risk that someone could take the estimate or the quote and then go sort of bargain on their own, right, with the insurance companies, because you know exactly which company is giving exactly which quote coming out of the brokerage. And so, you know, they wanted to make sure that they popped another ad or incentive to move that, you know, qualified lead into a customer, you know, so that they went through the purchase process. So what they did was, along each step of this process, they built link structures between each hub. These links are what we call exploration links, and they were used to capture the relationship between the hubs as the web surfer moved through these different states, you know, from one state to the next. And they collected all of that data into the Datavault for about 6 months. And they fed that data to this machine learning engine, this mining engine, and they trained the engine. And the mining engine refined the data. It calculated various scores, you know, related to ads and incentives and, you know, things like that. So that what they ended up doing was that the mining engine would start popping various ads. They were presented to the surfer based on behaviors and responses, you know, as they sort of changed state. During the first 6 months after tuning the ML engine, right, the revenue of that company grew from $66 million to about $125 million in 6 months. And then they took that data, they tuned the engine, they continued to receive and, you know, feed the data from the exploration links into that engine, continuously, you know, refining the algorithm and the data and things like that. The engine got so fast that it would literally pop an ad almost as soon as someone hit a button, right? Hit the next process button. And they left this thing running for 12 months. They actually got so fast that they could get a surfer from their initial visit, hitting the website, to a purchase in 5 minutes. And when you look at the way online, you know, marketing and online sales behave, the faster you can get someone into a purchase situation, the more likely you are that you're going to actually make that sale. Basically, at the end of 18 months, the full life cycle of this process, they had moved the company from a $66 million company to about a $330 million company. And then that company sold to a large, they were bought out, right? And so that's how we use Datavault and how it can be used in data science. Last year, at last year's Worldwide Datavault Consortium, the entire conference focused on, artificial intelligence and machine learning, a variety of, data science aspects. So we had a week's worth of presentations from data scientists and analytics professionals, including, a PhD candidate working out of Oxford University in UK. They all spoke about how they were able to utilize Datavault to optimize and enable their AI and their ML algorithms. So these are just examples of how, Datavault really enables data science. It was originally designed from the concepts around neural nets that are found organically in nature. So makes sense.
It makes complete sense now. And those are such great examples. And yeah, it's just kind of, for me, it's eye-opening just to think of the possibilities, like you said, and with those links and being able just to continue to drive the change that you can within an organization. So yeah, that's awesome.
So the fine-grained data that Datavault captures, that's the key, right? And then how it's modeled as well makes it conducive to training data science models?
Well, the whole idea of what we call exploration links is an exploration link is designed to discover relationships in data, in and among data, that are not evident in the operational systems. And because of that, if you think about what a lot of data scientists' goals are, they're looking for that outlier. They're looking for that sort of anomaly in the data that is not self-evident when you're looking at large volumes of data. So exploration links are one method that enable data scientists to use this derivation, if you will, of relationships among data. One of the things we did inside the DoD was we used those algorithms and we helped the data science do some scoring on the algorithm itself. For example, you have this idea of confidence ratings, if you will, and then how do you test those confidence ratings? A confidence rating, and just sort of as just a quick touch, it's not this simple, but think of a confidence rating as saying, an algorithm comes up with a derivation that this piece of data is related to this piece of data. And the algorithm has a rating of, let's just say, 86% that these two elements, these two keys, if you will, are related to one another. Well, what's interesting is another score, and the other score that we're looking at has to do with, you're this confident, but what does the data say? So if you have a confidence rating of 86, and then you run a score and you let the data tell the story, you may find that only 20% of the data support that confidence rating, which means that you have a false positive going on, because while the algorithm guesses that this is a relationship, the data doesn't support it, or doesn't support it strongly enough. It's called a strength rating. And so that's kind of, in a nutshell, what you can do with Datavault is the algorithm scores the derived relationship. The data tells the story that supports it. So that is one sort of
makes sense.
Illustration, right?
Yeah, really helps the data scientist with their feature engineering aspects of their job, right? What variable should I include? what's the relationship between the two. It just helps guide the exploration phase as well as the feature engineering aspect of it as well. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Datavault versus data mesh, right? Data mesh is certainly a fairly hot topic that's out there in industry. How would you compare Datavault to data mesh?
So, first of all, I'll say I am by no means a data mesh expert, and I don't play one on TV, right? What I do is listen to the industry. I read various articles like most people. I listen to podcasts like yours, Bob, and I kind of wrap my head around some of the terms that are being, thrown about, if you will, in the industry to try to discern. I'm listening more for like definitions. Can anybody actually define something, what this term means? So first, I would say that data mesh and Datavault aren't really apples to apples. Data mesh, at least in my mind, data mesh is a concept that's being sort of defined and fleshed out as the industry sort of wrestles with, how it's going to incorporate this new concept into their business. Which, Datavault, whereas Datavault is really a very well-defined methodology. It deals with, specifics related to, how to build a complete analytic solution, starting with the business concept perspectives, as Mike was pointing out, right, over to acquisition, data acquisition, out to information delivery. And then we circle back around through a closed loop system to, ultimately continuous improvement for the enterprise. So it's a true end-to-end solution. Data mesh, at least as I understand it, really talks about the democratization of the data store while it retains a centralized management of the data, the metadata. So to me, data mesh is this concept that espouses, moving the productionalization of information outcomes, out from under the control of IT and into the functional business areas in an effort to, address the problems that businesses have encountered in utilizing their data. So rather than, centralizing the data store in what data mesh terms this monolithic, data store, the data is democratized to the functional business areas while the metadata remains centrally managed. Secondly, one area where I see synergy then between data mesh concepts and the Datavault methodology is that both assume this centralized metadata infrastructure management approach in order to succeed. And that's sort of the tie-in between the two. In other words, in mesh, you can deploy the data wherever you want, but in order to be successful, it says you have to have centralized metadata management. The methodology of Datavault that addresses consistency, repeatability, pattern-based approaches to design of both the architecture, your process paradigms, and the logical data model are very much aligned with data mesh and would, in my opinion, I'll just say this, enhance any implementation of a data mesh. The data mesh concept has not defined how to do this. Again, it's a concept. Maybe you could even consider it a framework in its description of what needs to be done. It's not a methodology. It doesn't tell you how to build one, how to implement it, right? So, in fact, I will be bold enough to say, you've got this on recording. You can hold me to this, right? But I would be bold enough to say that the Datavault 2 methodology is the optimal approach for building out a data mesh because it does give you the how to build. The guiding principles that have underpinned what I would call the data mesh movement are exactly the same guiding principles that have been underpinned in the Datavault. We share a lot of the same values. We share a number of the same principles in the way that we approach these data and information challenges. So as you can imagine, with a methodology that shares so many of the same values and guiding principles, DVA personally, we're thrilled with what's going, coming out of data mesh. We believe that, the glove fits beautifully, it fits naturally, that Datavault 2 resonates with the concepts of the data mesh. So I will say, I will throw out a shameless plug, if I may, that one of our keynote speakers at the conference this year, coming up in May, is a woman by the name of Jennifer Stirrup. She's a recognized speaker, sort of a thought leader in our industry. And she's going to be talking about data mesh, data fabric, and Datavault. So I would encourage folks to take a look at, at the conference and what's going on there this year, because we are definitely addressing data mesh. But going back to this concept of data mesh, one of the business problems that the mesh is sort of aimed at helping to resolve is born out of the fact that the business has been asking for these things like self-exploration, discovery, self-service in, accessing and analyzing their data. And they've been asking for this for decades. And Datavault methodology was engineered to help sort of scratch that itch.
Well, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. What are some of the common criticisms of Datavault, and which ones are unfair?
I think the most common complaint from folks that are they look at the model again. And one of the comments is always, there are just too many joins. They complain that they can't get data out in a performant manner. And that's probably the number one complaint, and it's completely unfounded in our opinion and in the experience of a lot of our customers. If you follow the standards and the recommended best practice, you will be able to get information out to the business in a very highly performant manner, and that's at volume and at scale. And so we find that it's those implementations where the team has broken the standards or ignored the recommended best practices, that's where the problems arise.
Yeah, I think that I've heard that too many joins criticism before as well. And I think I usually chalk that up to people that haven't had the opportunity to learn some hard lessons. They might have a different answer in 5 years. So, yeah.
True.
Yeah, and there's a difference when you look under the covers. I mean, these are all inner joins. They're not left outers. So again, you start to talk about performance and what that means, and it's a big difference there too. And things that, if you look at, I always look traditionally back at some of the things that have been built over my lifetime, and how many times you get into scenarios where people have put in a lot of embedded sub-selects, and you start to do those, you're just basically looping through and it's so slow. And then, so that's way worse than a join, a true join that's going to be built on a good structure. So yeah, I that one's always funny. It's like, well, there's too many tables, too many joins. What? It's like, yeah, it's like anything else. You got to take it for what it's worth. But
well, one of the things and that's a great point, Mike, one of the things that we talk about, and one of the things we teach in Datavault, we talk about these loading patterns, these loading paradigms that are actually optimized for performance and tuning. And it kind of, leads into the idea of, some of the challenges that teams have to sort of migrate, or move to a Datavault solution. But it has to do with a long-standing tradition of thinking in, I would say, I'll say not thinking in block process mentality, not thinking of data in terms of blocks. We think of data, in other terms like, maybe windowing functions and things like that. We don't think of moving data from one block to the next or processing data from one block to the next. And so we get into these processes that are simply overloaded altogether. They're trying to do too much. And that's a hard habit for people that have been building in, in say, for star schemas, dimensions, and facts. It's a hard habit to break, not overloading your processes. And one of the things that we do teach in Datavault is, how to decouple, how to divide and conquer. It's the application of set logic math to the foundational aspects of how you build processes to move data. So it is a challenge there.
Yeah, definitely. So, Cindi, what do you think is the most difficult thing for developers to grasp when they're moving from doing traditional warehouse, whether it's 3NF or star schemas, to Datavault?
I think one of the toughest things for developers to deal with is stepping away from this practice of conforming data and applying business rules on the way into the data warehouse. The other difficult concept, and that's what we were just talking about, really is that data pipeline engineers struggle with, is this concept of divide and conquer, simplifying these traditionally overloaded processes and trying to accomplish all these operations in one load, trying to push data into, say, a conformed dimension. And that's just it's a hard habit to break. And it's also generally, it's not something you're necessarily taught in school. Like, how do you decompose an overloaded process? What are the techniques for simplifying and things like that? So I think those are the challenges that I believe I see the most.
And that makes a lot of sense. The things about, if you can take a step back and just see it as it unwinds and not having to have all of that stuff up front coming into the warehouse. It's like, let's just start getting the data in and then let it progress through that raw vault and then the business vaults where we can apply it. Just streamlines and simplifies. But like you said, our heads have been wrapped around for years that, we got to get this conformed. We got to build it up front. We can't. It is a paradigm shift. But for those, again, once your head gets wrapped around it, it's a major efficiency and better way of doing things.
Yeah, I mean, we've been taught to think and program in batch mentality, not block mentality. And, it's that looping, for this row, do X, Y, and Z, next row, do X, and it's all conditional and it's overloaded from I would say, from my opinion, but it's actually true in an overall, in our industry, I would say.
Yeah.
Cindi, what are some things that I can do in the beginning of my Datavault journey that'll help future-proof my implementation from re-engineering down the road, I guess, yeah.
I think there are a number of things, actually. Number one, I would say get your team trained. I mean, the entire team, including your architects, your data pipeline engineers, data modelers, agile leads, all of these folks that are part of this process. And I would say, including your sponsor, your champion, right? Get them trained so that they understand the importance of keeping the team, if you will, on the rails, adhering to the standards. That's, I think, the number one thing. The other thing is, I would engage in maybe a kickstart or coaching sessions with one of the authorized training partners. These are training partners that have been certified to train in Datavault standards, and they've embraced those standards in the manner in which they help their customers implement Datavaults. Third, I think I would reach out to DataVaultAlliance.com with questions. We're here to help. Attend the conference, either in person or virtually. Take a look at the sessions that are lining up for the conference this year at www.dvc.com. Meet some of the successful customers, learn about data mesh, hear first about this our advanced Datavault, virtual Datavault extension, find out what it's all about. Engage with a certified Datavault compliant automation vendor to help your teams accelerate. My recommendation is that you do that after your teams are trained. So we've seen teams rely on the automation tools to decide what the model, will look like based on the source systems that these tools have been connected to, if you will. And oftentimes these just result in source system data vault models, which are not what a Data Vault 2 solution is. I know you guys, I recall you guys chuckling when I said this last time, and I'll say it again. Building hubs, links, and satellites does not a Data Vault 2 solution make. So, and all of these automation tools, regardless of their close compliance to the Data Vault standard or not, they all have an easy button that you can hit, and it'll generate a model straight out of your source system. That's not a Data Vault, because it's not designed. You have to take the time to design. There is no silver bullet for that. There is no easy button for that. It takes work to do this correctly, and that's true in any data warehouse, or analytics solution. So,
thank you. It's so I'm fairly new to Data Vault in general, and it's fairly obvious that how Data Vault helps with ingestion. But how does it help when it comes to develop a star schema or some other modeling? Modeling that the business can take advantage of, right? How do we get from these neat ingestion models like hubs, satellites, all that stuff? How do we get it usable to the business?
I think one of the main keys in getting data, if you will, developing, if you want to say a star schema for a consumption at the consumption layer, is virtualization. We're able to construct views that simulate both dimensions and facts, for example, that remain views or virtual objects. This enables agility and flexibility at the consumption layer. It's much easier to be agile, to pivot when you are working with a view rather than actually physically having to move data. And so, that I would say that is probably one of the key things, is what we call virtualization, which is really, writing a view on top of a raw vault or a business vault.
That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the key is understanding that's, like you say, is being able to get it to the hands of people to review. Because if you, let's say you're off the mark just a little bit, you can turn around changes much quicker, and then decide at some point in time if it's getting to be where performance dictates that you have to kind of go to a physical table, then do so. But the agility play with virtualization, I think, is definitely huge.
Yeah, I agree, Mike.
Well, any parting thoughts or advice to folks out there that want to continue to know more about and learn about Data Vault?
Yeah. So I think, if I may, I'd like to just sort of clarify, if I can, for a moment, about what this advanced virtual Data Vault extension really is, just at a really high level. And so what I'd like to just say about this is that, Dan has always been a visionary. He's constantly reading, researching about future trends, looking at ways to innovate. Data Vault would not be as flexible as it is in its implementation architecture if it didn't allow for innovations in the technological landscape, right? So a huge part of that has to do with the fact that it's it is, what we call platform and database technology independent. And because of this, when new technologies do get introduced into the marketplace, we're always looking at ways to help customers take advantage of those platforms. And so we innovate, but we innovate with the standards in place. So, in 2018, at the first and only so far European conference we've had of WWDVC, one of the things Dan did was talk about predictions. He loves giving predictions, and so he talked about this concept that soon data would be simply too large. It would be too much data. It would be too large to move, right? And so, that thinking of his started back in, around 2012. He actually started blogging about it when that wave was rising with Hadoop. So he's been thinking about this, this problem of data being, too big to move for over a decade. And And 2 years ago, he started working on this extension to Datavault that just fits beautifully into this arena. It enables companies that have Datavault 2 compliant warehouses to sort of add to their toolboxes. And it ensures that there's no loss of the investment that has been made, right? There's no, retraining investment. There's no refactoring investment. What's been built continues and is preserved. So what this advanced virtual Data Vault extension does is it ensures that, what we've always taught, which is, that as it relates to standards and rules around the Data Vault model, the Data Vault 2 is a logical model. How the model is implemented physically may look different, right, from its logical design. So when we start talking about this extension, this advanced virtual Data Vault is something that Dan's been blogging about for years. Right. So now that we've arrived at this time in industry where data simply is too big to move, we are, as an innovator, addressing that phenomenon that we're encountering now with the amount of data that we have is simply too big to move, which Dan, has been predicting since, 2012 at least. And so we want to be able to ensure that Datavault is resilient to technology changes in the future. Whatever the technology changes are over the next 5 to 7 years, we're always looking at innovation in technique and enabling the Datavault standards to continue to stand the test of time so that it remains a methodology that is trustworthy to invest in. And so we think about this, from terms of, hardware vendors and tool vendors, they sort of come and go, but the solid engineering principles behind good data management, data governance, auditability, flexibility, scalable, this kind of resilient design, those principles don't change. So if you have this as your foundation, then you basically invested in educating your teams, learning this methodology, so that it grows with your organization and is resilient to the changes in the industry, which is one of the reasons why we're able to offer something like an extension that's based on the logical model to help teams get greater acceleration, right, and reduce this process time, if you will, process of the data at the foundational level. So we're excited to announce this. We're excited to talk about it in detail at the conference. We've been trying to get Dan to stand down, he's really excited about this. He's excited about bringing it to the community, and we're excited too. But we want to launch this at the right time, and so we want to be able to use the conference as a great platform, along with these concepts of mesh and fabric and all these things that are coming out, and put this whole package together for people from a conceptual and standards perspective. So we're excited,
Yeah,
wow,
sounds like it's going to be a great one.
That just even makes the conference even more compelling to want to attend. So I think May is going to be a very special month when it comes to for data people this year. So
yeah, thank you, Mike.
Excellent. And we'll have links to the conference information and some of the other things we talked about. I'll also include a link to the episode 1 of this conversation, right? So part 1. So should have mentioned this at the top of the conversation, but yeah, again, I'll include that link and you'll be able to catch up. And Cindi, thank you very much for coming on the show again. Mike, thank you very much for co-hosting again.
Gentlemen, always a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.